Hello, my name is Amber Morgan. Today I am going to be discussing two models used by instructional designers, SAM and Dick and Carey. SAM, or known as the Successive Approximations Model, was developed by Dr. Michael Allen, and this is actually more of a process model, or considered more of a process model than a design model, and it is an agile development model. So it's intended to be simple and quick, it's very efficient and flexible, and it's highly iterative. As you can see, it begins with a preparation phase, and during this phase, those involved in the process are gathering information on the learners, gathering information on what materials are already available, what budgets, time constraints, things of those nature. And then the iterative design phase, as you can see here, begins with what's called a savvy start. This is just kind of a brainstorming session. I've actually seen visuals where the savvy start was put with the preparation phase instead of the design phase. But this is actually the visual directly from Dr. Allen's site. So I kind of went with this one. But it seems that the savvy start is sometimes considered in either the preparation or part of the design phase. But this is really just kind of a time to get you jump started on the project. And this is where you really just kind of jump into starting to create prototypes, starting to create designs, proofs, and mock-ups. And so that's really what's the heart of SAM, is that it's really focused on getting into the design of the product and just making improvements. So it is very iterative. Successive, meaning that it does follow a set of prescribed steps, but then they are repeated over and over again. So as you are in these phases, you can see in the visual that each of these processes are repeated. So for each component being created, or each prototype that's kind of created for each component, it's going to go through these phases, and then they're going to be repeated a minimum of 3 times before moving on to the next phase, and typically around about 3 times. And there are 2 versions depending on the size and scope of the project and the time constraints. It can be a two-phase version or a 3-phase version. In the 2-phase version, the design and development phases are simply combined into 1 phase in order to kind of expedite the creation of these prototypes. So as I mentioned, this is a collaborative approach. Prototyping is a big part of this, and the focus is really on just continuous improvement. So it does kind of come with the understanding that nothing can really be perfect, but improvement, anything can be improved upon. So continuous improvement of the product is really kind of at the heart of SAM. And then Dick and Carey is a model that I studied in a previous course, and this is a little bit older model, and this is more of a design model based in the process model of ADDIE, or the ADDIE framework. So it does follow, it is more linear and very procedural. It follows a set of steps. It has multiple steps that it follows, but it's also an iterative process as well, in that even there is some movement between steps and some back and forth if needed in order to make improvements. It takes a systems approach, so it kind of has the understanding that that all components are interrelated, and therefore what affects one component could affect the system as a whole. So keeping that in mind, it really that allows for those iterations to kind of move from one stage back to another, making improvements, making corrections or adjustments as needed. And it does also focus on both creating and improving effective instruction. This particular model is grounded in theory and research. It is heavily influenced by behavioral learning theory, and takes that in consideration, especially with the identification of the goals and your performance objectives and outcomes. It is heavily influenced by Gagne's conditions of learning, and these are considered when developing the in designing the instructional components, the lessons, and the cognitivism is also a big, strong component of this particular model, with some elements of constructivism as well. It's more slow and meticulous process than the SAM, as we mentioned before. So it does take some time, and it is very detailed. So comparing the two, Dick and Carey is a linear design approach, whereas SAM is very highly iterative, and it's more of a process approach than a design approach. Dick and Carey can be very slow, it's very meticulous, very detail-oriented, whereas SAM is fast-moving and it's very flexible. When looking at what they have in common, they both have analysis, design, and development phases. They both are focused on the needs of the learners, and they both do have, some iterative processes within, their approach. And finally, I would think that Dick and Carey would work best if time is not a major concern. If I were going to be building a project completely from scratch and I had plenty of time to work on it, if I had wanted to really have a strong focus on goals and learner outcomes and making those match up, I think Dick and Carey is a great and very thorough model to follow. However, if time is a constraint, if a project is needed to be created very quickly, SAM tends to work a little better. I think SAM would work really well on a project that was perhaps an existing project that I really wanted to improve upon, or perhaps maybe moving an instructional training or course from an in-person or face-to-face format to an e-learning format, or any other type of modality change there. I think SAM could work really well because it's really focused on making improvements and finding and creating the best product. With the focus is much more on engagement and just the experience of the learner, more so than those specific goals and outcomes. I think the SAM model also works really well. But I think both are very good models. I think both have value and can be utilized, and depending on what the situation calls for, how much time is involved, and of course, the cost as well. So hopefully you found this helpful. I look forward to hearing your comments. These are my resources, and I look forward to hearing your discussions on the models that you chose to talk about.